Denver, Colorado. Would you risk your life to save someone who wouldn't even look at you? Denver, Colorado. The city glittered under the cold winter sky, its streets dusted with fresh snow. To most, the holiday lights twinkling along storefronts and lampposts created a picture-perfect scene. But for Jamal, winter was just another battle to survive. At 13 years old, Jamal had seen more hardship than most kids his age. After his mother passed away, it was just him and his grandmother, Nana Louise, trying to scrape by in a tiny, run-down apartment. The heating barely worked, and most nights they huddled under layers of blankets, praying the power wouldn't go out. While other kids worried about video games and school dances, Jamal worried about making sure his grandma stayed warm in the brutal Denver cold. He worried about stretching what little food they had so they wouldn't go hungry before the next government check came in. He worried about missing too many days of school because of the flu, since they couldn't afford medicine. The wealthy people in town never paid him any attention. To them, he was just another poor black boy they walked past without a second glance. Sometimes they clutched their bags tighter when they saw him. Sometimes they didn't even notice him at all. But despite it all, Jamal never let himself grow bitter. He worked hard in school, determined to build a better life for himself and Nana Louise. He shoveled sidewalks for extra cash, helped neighbors carry groceries, and never complained, not even when his fingers were numb from the cold. One freezing night, everything changed. Jamal was walking home after finishing a long shift at the corner store. His breath puffed out in clouds, his thin jacket doing little to keep the chill from creeping into his bones. He kept his hands in his pockets, head down, trying to block out the cold. That was when he saw it. A sleek black car, its hazard lights blinking, was stopped in the middle of the road. The driver's side door was open, but there was no one inside. Jamal's steps slowed. Something wasn't right. Then he heard it, a faint cry for help. His heartbeat quickened. He turned toward the alleyway beside the car, peering into the shadows. And that's when he saw her. "Where are you watching from, and what time is it?" The cold cut through the night like a blade. Denver's streets, coated in a slick layer of ice, were nearly empty, the wind howling between buildings. Jamal pulled his jacket tighter around himself as he stepped out of the small grocery store, a bag of soup and bread clutched in his hands. He had spent the last of his money on it, making sure Nana Louise would have something warm to eat tonight. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional distant honk or the crunch of snow under his worn sneakers. He was used to walking home alone, his path winding through streets lined with high-end stores and gated mansions, places he knew he didn't belong. He didn't mind. He had bigger things to worry about. As he passed an empty intersection, his eyes landed on a bright red coat. A woman was parked by the curb, struggling to reach into her car. Her breath came out in short bursts of steam, her hands fumbling with something in the back seat. Jamal recognized her instantly, Rebecca Langford. Her face had been all over the news. The wife of a powerful businessman, known for her lavish charity galas, and her not-so-secret disdain for people like him. She had been caught on camera once, making comments about keeping certain people out of her neighborhood. The kind of person who wouldn't even look at him if they crossed paths. Jamal exhaled, shaking his head. He didn't care about people like her. He just wanted to get home. Then, the sound of screeching tires shattered the silence. Jamal's head snapped toward the road. A truck, moving too fast, skidded on the ice. The tires screeched as the driver lost control, the heavy vehicle swerving violently toward the curb. Right toward Rebecca Langford. She didn't see it. She was still bent over in her car, completely unaware of the danger barreling toward her. But Jamal did. The headlights flooded the street, growing brighter, closer. The truck wasn't stopping. It was sliding too fast. He had only seconds to act. Jamal's heart pounded. He could turn away, let fate handle it. She had never cared about him. Why should he care about her? But his feet were already moving. He had no time to think, only time to act. He dropped his grocery bag and ran. The icy pavement threatened to trip him, but he pushed forward, his breath burning in his chest. The roar of the engine filled his ears, drowning out everything else. He reached her just as the truck skidded closer, just as the lights nearly swallowed them whole. Rebecca finally turned, eyes wide with confusion, and then terror. Jamal lunged, grabbing her arm with all the strength he had. The truck was only feet away. The truck's headlights sliced through the icy darkness, its tires shrieking as they skidded across the frozen road. The massive vehicle swayed uncontrollably, barreling forward like a beast with no master. Rebecca Langford turned just in time for the glow of the lights to catch her face. Her breath hitched. Horror spread across her features. She tried to move, to step away from danger, but her feet refused to obey. The ice beneath her was too slick, her body too slow. Jamal didn't hesitate. His muscles burned as he pushed off the frozen pavement, sprinting toward her with everything he had. The cold air bit at his lungs, his feet slipping beneath him, but he didn't stop. His eyes locked onto Rebecca, his heartbeat drowning out the world around him. The truck was too close. Jamal lunged. His fingers gripped the thick fabric of her coat, and with every ounce of strength he had, he yanked her backward. The momentum sent them both flying, their bodies crashing into a snowbank as the truck thundered past. A rush of wind and ice sprayed over them. The deafening screech of tires filled the air before the truck slammed into a lamppost, sending shards of metal and glass scattering across the street. Then, silence. Jamal lay still, his chest heaving, the freezing snow seeping through his thin jacket. His arms ached from the force of pulling Rebecca away. Slowly, he turned his head to check on her. Rebecca was beside him, gasping for breath, her face pale against the darkness. Her wide eyes darted from the wreckage to Jamal, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Jamal sat up, his heart still pounding from the near-death experience. He looked over at Rebecca, expecting gratitude, maybe even relief. "Are you okay?" he asked, breathless. Rebecca clutched her belly, her face pale, but her eyes weren't filled with gratitude. Instead, they were filled with something else. Shock, anger. "You!" she stammered, her voice shaking. "You touched me." Jamal blinked, confusion washing over him. I was just trying to save you." Her hands instinctively patted her coat, brushing off the slushy ice that clung to the expensive fabric. Her lips curled in frustration. "Do you have any idea how much this costs?" Jamal stared at her in disbelief. He had nearly died pulling her to safety, and she was worried about her coat? A bitter laugh threatened to rise in his throat, but he swallowed it down. "You should be thanking me," he muttered, pushing himself to his feet. But before he could walk away, Rebecca let out a sharp gasp. Her hands flew to her stomach, her breath hitching as she doubled over slightly. A pained groan escaped her lips. Jamal hesitated. "What's wrong?" Rebecca clenched her jaw, her fingers digging into the fabric of her coat. Something's wrong." Then he saw it. The panic in her eyes, the way her body trembled. Her baby. Jamal's stomach twisted. He didn't know much about pregnancy, but he knew enough to recognize distress when he saw it. "Are you in labor?" he asked. Rebecca's breathing grew shallower. She tried to take a step toward her car, but another sharp pain stopped her. "No, it's too early," she whispered, shaking her head. "It's not supposed to happen yet." Jamal looked around. The street was still empty. The truck that had nearly hit them sat wrecked against the lamp-post, steam rising from its crushed hood. Whoever had been driving it was gone, having fled the scene. No one else was around, no passing cars, no pedestrians, no one to help. "We need to get you to a hospital," Jamal said quickly. "Can you walk?" Rebecca gritted her teeth, gripping the side of the car for balance. I don't know." Jamal glanced down at her phone, which had fallen onto the icy pavement during the chaos. He picked it up and held it out to her. "Call someone. Call your husband. Call 911. She took the phone with trembling fingers, but as soon as she tried to swipe the screen, she let out a frustrated whimper. "It's frozen. The cold. It won't work." Jamal clenched his fists. "Okay, then we do this the hard way." He stepped closer, hesitating for only a second before offering his arm. "Lean on me. We have to get inside before you collapse." Rebecca's eyes flickered with hesitation. For a brief moment, she looked at him like she was considering refusing his help, as if her pride was still stronger than her pain. But then, another contraction hit, and her body tensed in agony. She grabbed onto his arm without another word. Jamal braced himself as she leaned against him, her weight heavier than he expected. Slowly, carefully, he helped her toward the car. Every step felt agonizingly slow. The ice beneath their feet made it treacherous, and Rebecca was barely able to stand, let alone walk. But Jamal kept moving, determined. The hospital was too far. There was no one else around, and time was running out. Rebecca Langford was about to have her baby, and the only person there to help her was the boy she had once ignored. Rebecca's breaths were coming faster now, her entire body trembling as she gripped her stomach. Panic filled her wide eyes. "Call an ambulance," she gasped, barely able to get the words out. Jamal's hands fumbled for his phone, fingers numb from the cold. He pressed the power button, but his screen didn't light up. He tried again. Nothing. He stared at it in frustration. His phone was dead. Even if it wasn't, he knew from experience that this part of town had terrible reception. He swallowed hard. "I can't," he admitted, looking around. The street was empty. The truck driver had disappeared and no one else was nearby. Rebecca let out another pained groan, her knees nearly buckling as she leaned against the wrecked lamp-post. I can't do this here," she gasped. "We have to get inside." Jamal's mind raced. The closest building was the grocery store, but they had locked up by now. His own apartment was too far away. The only option was one of the mansions on the other side of the street. He doubted anyone inside would open their doors for a kid like him, but he had to try. "Come on," he said, stepping toward her. "We have to move. I'll help you." Rebecca flinched slightly as he reached out. He saw the hesitation flicker across her face, the old instinct to pull away from him, to keep her distance. Even now, even in pain, some part of her still saw him as just a poor black boy, someone she wouldn't normally speak to. But then another contraction hit, and all her pride crumbled. She clutched at his arm, her grip desperate. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jamal nodded. He had no medical training, no experience with pregnancy, but he knew one thing. She couldn't stay out here. If they didn't move, she and the baby wouldn't make it. Taking a deep breath, he bent down slightly. "I'm gonna carry you." Rebecca stiffened. "You can't." "I can," Jamal interrupted, voice firm. "You don't have a choice." Another contraction hit and she let out a sharp cry, her body doubling over. Jamal didn't wait for permission. He crouched, gripping her legs and hoisting her onto his back. She wasn't as heavy as he expected, but the awkward angle made it hard to keep balance on the ice. She gasped, clinging to his shoulders as another wave of pain ripped through her. "Oh, God! Hold on," Jamal gritted out, taking careful, deliberate steps. His arms burned, his feet slid dangerously against the frozen pavement, but he kept going. The wind howled, stinging his skin. Each step felt like an eternity. He focused on one thing, getting to the other side of the street, to the safety of the gated houses. Someone had to be home. Someone had to help. The mansion closest to them loomed ahead, its massive iron gates locked, but the porch light was on. Someone was there. Jamal forced his legs to move faster, almost there. Rebecca's grip on him tightened, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. I think." She didn't finish. Her body tensed violently and Jamal felt a rush of warmth against his back. His stomach dropped. Her water had just broken, and they were running out of time. Jamal pushed forward, forcing his aching legs to keep moving. The cold bit into his skin, but he ignored it. He reached the gate and banged on it with his fist. "Help! Somebody help us!" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a light flickered on inside the house. A shadow moved behind the curtains. Jamal prayed they wouldn't turn him away, because they were out of options. Jamal's arms ached, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts, as he struggled to keep Rebecca upright. The freezing wind bit at his skin, but he didn't slow down. Each step across the ice felt unsteady, his worn-out sneakers slipping against the frozen pavement. He had to get her somewhere warm, somewhere safe. The mansion gates had been locked, and there was no time to waste knocking on doors that might not open. A few blocks away, he spotted a diner. The neon sign flickered against the darkness, the faint hum of life inside visible through the frosted windows. It was their best chance. "Almost there," he muttered, his voice tight with effort. Rebecca clung to his shoulders, her fingers gripping his jacket as another contraction tore through her. She let out a strangled gasp, tears welling in her eyes. Why are you helping me?" she whispered, barely able to speak through the pain. Jamal's steps faltered for just a moment. It would have been easy to say nothing, to ignore the question, to remind her of how she had treated him just minutes ago. But that wasn't who he was. "Because it's the right thing to do," he answered simply, tightening his grip on her legs as he pushed forward. They finally reached the diner. Jamal staggered toward the entrance and kicked the door with his foot, too exhausted to knock. It swung open with a creak, and the warm air rushed over them. A handful of customers and workers turned toward the door, their eyes widening at the sight. "Help! She's in labor!" Jamal called out, his voice desperate. Within seconds, people were rushing toward them. A waitress gasped, grabbing towels. A man in a chef's uniform pulled out his phone to call for an ambulance. Another customer helped Jamal ease Rebecca into a booth, where she slumped against the cushioned seat, her breathing shallow and fast. Jamal let out a shaky breath, his body finally sagging with exhaustion. He had done it. She was safe now. Rebecca's fingers suddenly tightened around his wrist. "Stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please." Jamal blinked in surprise. Of all the things he had expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. He hesitated, glancing around. He had done his part. He could leave now, let the paramedics take over. but something about the way she held on to him, the way she looked at him now, not with disdain, not with judgment, but with something else, made him pause. He nodded. Just as he settled into the seat across from her, the diner doors burst open again. A tall man in a suit rushed in, his face contorted with worry. His expensive coat barely looked touched by the storm outside, but his hands trembled as he scanned the room. Rebecca's husband. Jamal swallowed hard, bracing himself. He had no idea what was about to happen next. The diner fell silent as Charles Langford stormed through the door, his expensive coat barely touched by the storm outside. His eyes locked onto Rebecca, his breath coming fast. He rushed to her side, dropping to one knee. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice urgent, filled with panic. Rebecca nodded weakly, still clutching her stomach. Her breathing was labored, but there was relief in her eyes. "Because of him," she whispered, her gaze shifting toward Jamal. Charles turned, his eyes finally landing on the boy who had carried his wife through the freezing night. His expression was unreadable as he took in Jamal's torn clothes, his frozen hands, the exhaustion written across his face. "You saved my wife," Charles said, his voice quieter now. Jamal shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Rebecca. "I guess." Rebecca grabbed her husband's hand, her fingers digging into his. "We owe him, Charles, more than just money." Charles hesitated. He was a man used to fixing problems with money, but this was different. He looked at Jamal again, really looked at him. The boy had risked everything for a woman who had never given him a second glance before tonight. "Come with me," Charles said. Jamal stiffened. "Where?" "Just come." Rebecca gave Jamal a reassuring nod. He swallowed his nerves and followed. The next morning, Jamal sat inside a sleek office, his fingers gripping the arms of a leather chair. Across from him, a lawyer adjusted his glasses, sliding a folder across the desk. "This," the lawyer said, "is a full scholarship to one of the best schools in the state. And this," he pushed forward another document, "is the deed to a small home for you and your grandmother. Mr. Langford insists." Jamal's breath caught in his throat. I don't understand." Charles stepped forward. "I can't change the past," he admitted, "but I can change your future." Jamal stared at the papers, his heart pounding. For so long, life had been about surviving. Now, for the first time, it was about something more. He had saved a life that night. And in return, he got a future. His hands trembled as he reached for the papers, his mind still trying to process it all. Rebecca placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice softer now. "You earned this." Jamal swallowed hard, nodding. For the first time in his life, he truly believed it. Would you have done what Jamal did? Comment below, like and share if you believe in second chances,